Hello, I'm Simeon Corty.
And I'm Hal Stewart.
And you are listening to an author chat about the forthcoming horror thriller All Hollow. So, Hal, do you want to just explain the idea behind this little chat?
We both love reading, and you particularly love writing. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would be telling any untruths when I say award-winning author opposite my face.
Thank you very much.
And we decided that it would be a really good idea to one summer write, for the very first time for both of us, a screenplay. And you had been to Gibraltar with a radio station in a work capacity, and kind of found the place fascinating.
The mighty BFBS allowed me to work there for a couple of weeks. This is going back a long time, and it is a fascinating place, Gibraltar. If you've never been, I urge you to go. It's brilliant. And inside this big jagged rock that sticks out of the Mediterranean, unbeknownst to most people, are loads and loads of secret tunnels. Miles of them. I mean, Gibraltar's about 2 miles long, right?
A little bit longer than that.
But there's 34 miles, I think, of tunnels in there, just all like tangled tunnels.
I think Gibraltar is 3 miles in length, but if you actually walk around it, it's 9 miles. But 34 miles, therefore, of tunnels gives you an idea of just how enormous the rock is.
You can tell you work on a sports show. He loves his stats.
I'm all about detail. And anyone from Gibraltar listening will go, he's got that all wrong.
You said it with such conviction.
Pretty sure that's what I remember.
So listen, that's the background to why we're both here, because we found these tunnels fascinating. What you're listening to this for, hopefully, is because the book of that story is now out. On the 22nd of October 2019, All Hollow, the book, is released as paperback and ebook. So we thought we'd give you this little glimpse into the background to it, why we wrote it, and what we think is so cool about it.
We'd always done comedy before, Sim. And we'd, again, I don't mind saying this, we'd won awards for our comedy.
That's right. And actually, we set our benchmark for quality based on that silver award at New York.
What was our
catchphrase?
Not quite gold.
Not quite gold.
Never reached the dizzy heights.
That was the benchmark.
So we realised that in terms of comedy, we are only as good as second place. So there surely must be another genre of which we could excel. So naturally, you follow comedy with
horror.
Dark horror.
Very gritty horror.
And we love horror. We always have. We've got favourite horror movies. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for me, was one that, since I was definitely 18 and first saw it, was my personal favourite. And it's one that I've read a great deal about. Tobe Hooper was someone I studied as well. I actually studied Psycho, the movie, at university, did my dissertation on that. And you, of course, also share a love of all things horror.
Whenever a horror film comes out, we watch it, we talk about it. We're constantly swapping little notes and quotes on horror films. My favourite, for the record, as you've done yours, you got that in quick.
Nice.
Is Wreck. It just shows
Spanish
that you can
film, or the American version.
Yeah, no, the Spanish original.
Make that clear.
But yeah, one of the things I love about it is the pace, as well as obviously the gritty drama of following this little news reporter on this horrific job in some sort of possessed apartment block in Spain. But it's 70 minutes long, and I love a short film.
And we love a short book.
Exactly. Do you see the link there?
Yeah.
Because what we've done with All Hollow is paid homage to our favourite horror films in it's a short book. Strictly speaking, Hal, by publishing terms, All Hollow is a novella.
It is, and when we were writing the original story, as I mentioned, we tried to do a screenplay first and then transformed it, mostly Sim's work there.
Entirely, thanks.
Okay, entirely Sim's work there into a book, hence why his name is larger on the cover. I didn't lose paper, rock, scissors. I kept thinking about a film, which is Cabin in the Woods.
Oh.
And that's largely down to the way that characters are portrayed in Cabin in the Woods and how we tried to do it slightly differently. And in my mind was always, well, they could have gone down this kind of tried and tested path. And Cabin in the Woods kind of exposed how the tropes exist, but we're going to transform your expectations.
Yeah, that was such a clever breakthrough horror film. Horror films with humour in have been done for years, and we love that as well, because we've talked about comedy. I love the wit of Cabin in the Woods, but the really clever thing was exposing the inner workings of a horror film. I know Scream did it brilliantly, but what I loved about Cabin was just the fact that it took absolutely standard tropes, like the jock, the fool. So when we were discussing the idea for the tunnels in Gibraltar being a horror film, I remember we were sitting in a very famous noodle restaurant talking about this plot that we were cooking up, And we both said we should do a bit of a cabin in the woods thing. We should take those tropes, but twist them in a really unexpected way. So in All Hollow, you might start reading it and think, oh, this feels a bit like a fairly standard horror film. It's four friends going on holiday. What could possibly go wrong? But I hope that you'll see pretty early on, they're not exactly the characters you'd expect. And the whole point of the book is to pull the rug out from under your feet. That's kind of the aim.
Yeah, we deliberately start to set it up in that familiar way so that you think, I know where this is going. And I very much hope that it isn't in any way possible to figure out exactly what is going on towards the end of this story.
Should we just have a little word on the research? Because this is not a book that we researched on Google.
I thought this is not a book that we researched.
Full stop. Not many people would go to the lengths that we went to.
That's
because
true.
You were a much-loved resident of Gibraltar for about 6 months.
Was, before the book was released.
And now this book's coming out, that will end.
Tourism has been booming in Gibraltar.
Until now. We got a second opportunity for me to go into the tunnels.
This is a behind-the-scenes, off-the-beaten track. You have to know people to get into these tunnels. There are World War II tunnels that if you've been to Gibraltar you may well have done. Well, these are a different set of tunnels that if you know people who are working as part of the Ministry of Defence, you can actually get access and see what many people who even live in Gibraltar and have for many years will never witness.
That's where this book is set, in the secret tunnels that are out of bounds, because we got to go in there, and as well as soaking up the amazing history of this hidden military town that most people on the service aren't aware of, with hospitals, roads, a morgue, just kind of rotting away in there. So as well as soaking up the brilliant history, it's so apparent how terrifying it would be to be trapped down there.
You can imagine in days of old that this would have been something that people would have been discovering as they went along, and you had no idea what was around the next corner. Of course, I was with a guide, but when you get to see it and you can imagine what could go wrong down here, it suddenly takes on a whole new life.
Well, let's talk about what can go wrong. You've got these amazing tunnels, but every horror needs certain elements in it. I think we've mentioned the characters. There are four friends in this story, and it appears that they're standard horror tropes. One's quite athletic, one's a little bit slutty, one's more pure, one's a bit of a fool. So you think, oh, I know where this is going. It doesn't end there. There are other characters involved who may be key to the plot. But there are other elements that horrors need. So when you sit down to watch a horror film or read a brilliant Stephen King short horror story, what are your favourite elements?
I always try, and I know my wife particularly hates it, I always try and guess when I've started in any book where it's going to finish. I try and
can't
leap.
Help yourself.
No, I can't. I can leap to the end. And there's that pleasure of the text, which you sometimes get when you feel like you know something, but the characters in the story don't. We've done a little bit of that, but when you guess it and you get it right, you actually don't like that.
Do you think anyone will guess this one?
No, and that's where I was sort of headed in a long-winded kind of way, very much like the tunnels of Gibraltar. I was going around.
We may get to a point, but we just don't know when.
Well, we're just lost, but we've sort of said something that if you took anything out of it that made sense, well done. What about you, Sim? Is there anything when you're reading a horror book that you particularly enjoy?
I'm a fan of foreshadowing and plants, but mainly foreshadowing. So, foreshadowing is where something ominous happens, apropos nothing else, really. Just a weird thing happens. And as a reader or a viewer, you go, "Oh, hello! I bet that means something. I bet that's a bit of a thematic scene." And plants as well. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's the moment in a horror film where one of the characters will go, "Yeah, I just came back from Kung Fu college and I'm having a great summer." You kind of think, I bet the Kung Fu comes in handy later.
Yeah,
it's that
absolutely.
moment. We've done a few of those. They're not that cheesy. I think we've buried them really well.
And I love the fact that before I'd ever worked on something like this with you, I kind of imagined that you'd just kind of write it and as you went along. But there's so much that needs to go in beforehand. Planning, plotting, and knowing that if you put something in at point A, there'll be B, C, and D that will mean that A was actually an important part. Like you said, planting something.
We should explain a bit about our working relationship here as well, because as we've said earlier on, this started life as an idea in a noodle restaurant. It became a screenplay that the two of us wrote over one summer. And then it basically didn't do much for a couple of years while we both got on with our lives. And I said, let me write the book. because we knew the story. But in writing the book, the story then developed even further. It's become so much stronger, so much more is happening. There's so much more depth to all the characters than in the original idea. But we kept having to phone each other, didn't we? Because I would phone you and go, oh, mate, massive plot hole.
And you'd realise.
Yeah, stuff that you hadn't even clocked. You'd go, well,
I've reread the screenplay.
She says that. Oh, have you?
Since.
Oh, God, what's that like?
Well, it's different.
Yeah, it would be different.
Because the story has developed, it's grown legs.
Yeah, totally.
And it needed to be fleshed out. And until you see it on the pages that you fantastically put together, it was hard sometimes to spot those plot holes. I mean, really hard.
Yeah.
We were so heavily invested in it, we sometimes missed the most glaring things. And it was only when we came back to them that, or we would sometimes have help from others that would point them out.
I think plotting in horror is got to be one of the most difficult genres. Not that I've written many other genres, but it's certainly compared to the happy-go-lucky world of comedy, the plotting of this was a real headache.
We're on terra firma with comedy.
We know where we are.
You know, everyone understands how you set up a proper gag, but setting up proper horror is now a matter of opinion, because so many things have been done, there are no original ideas, as they say, that you almost have to find a new angle. Well, a new angle very rarely exists, so you find a different way of doing something that's already happened. Was it Tarantino, steal and make better?
Yeah, there you go. That's kind of what we've done here, I hope. That's going to be what, when people say, isn't it a bit like, I'm going to go, hey, steal and make better.
I hope we've done the better bit.
I like that. I think we have. Listen, I think we've chatted for long enough about this. All Hollow is released as an ebook and paperback on the 22nd of October 2019. Final words, Hal. What's your favourite thing about All Hollow?
So if I was to answer that, being honest, it gives away a lot of spoilers.
Can't do that. No spoilers. On that though, Hal, if people buy the audio book, we're going to record a version of this chat with loads of spoilers in to discuss all the little cool things that we've done.
The part I enjoyed most when we came up with the original story was developing and fleshing out the characters. But if I can just use Gibraltar as a setting as my favourite, because one thing I want to make really clear is Gibraltar is somewhere I love. It is one of my favourite places to have lived, to have worked, and always now will be one of my favourite holiday destinations. I don't want anyone to read this and think that anything other than love for this wonderful isthmus, because it is truly magnificent. We just happen to set a story in a place that we admire so much because it lends itself perfectly to horror.
Yeah, we love it, and that's why we set a story there. My favourite thing about it is the end. Not because it was over as a writer, but we wrote a fantastically outrageous final act to All Hollow, which I love because it's preposterous, and I just think it's so brilliant.
Oh, when you say preposterous, I mean it could happen.
Yeah,
let's
totally.
make that very
totally.
clear. All of this could happen.
But it's just so shocking that everyone who's read the early drafts is jaw open going, I can't believe that's what was going on.
That's true.
I love that, but I absolutely love the epilogue. There's 2 pages at the end that happen sort of 3 weeks after the whole story. And it was like a little final thought from me when I was writing the book. And I ran it past you and wrote it. And I just think it's so cute. It's one of those little things that I think when you read the book, you'll get to that last line of the epilogue and go, oh no. And it's one of those like the background rushes away moments.
And I think
I'm really proud of that.
It will leave you thinking for days, hopefully weeks, about the entire story, because everything will come together and a lot of things will make sense once you've got to that wonderful idea of having the epilogue.
Well, it's been lovely to chat, Hal, and thank you for listening to our little authorly chat with Simeon Corti and Hal Stewart about All Hollow, out on paperback and ebook October 2019. Enjoy.